Hey folks, Mr. Bucko here with a couple of examples on how to solve quadratic equations with the quadratic formula, which is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So we'll use this formula here to solve quadratic equations. If the quadratic equation is in standard form, we'll look at that in just a second. Now here it says the portion of the formula that's within the square root, the b squared minus 4ac, that's called the discriminant. And the discriminant helps us determine how many answers there are to the equation. So this value in the square root, when we plug in those values a, b, and c, and evaluate that discriminant, that tells us how many answers there are. Because if this value is positive, there are going to be two real roots or two real solutions to the quadratic equation we are solving. Because if this is positive, we take the positive and negative square root. If this discriminant is 0, there's only going to be one answer because the square root of 0 is only 0. And then if this value is negative, there is no real answer or no real roots because you can't take the square root of a negative number. So we'll look at these briefly here straight from the notes that you have. So the first example, or one of the examples here, we have this equation x squared equals negative 6x minus 9. The first thing we're going to do is set the quadratic equation equal to 0, because in order to solve any quadratic equation, we're going to set it equal to 0. Hence, that's why it's called finding the zeros of the equation. So what we did with this is we just added 6x and negative 9 to both sides of the equation, setting the equation equal to 0. From here, we can see our a, b, and c values. Our a value is 1, our b value is 6, and our c value is 9. So we plug that into the discriminant of the b squared minus 4 times a times c. That is 36 minus 36. Therefore, the discriminant of this quadratic equation is 0. So there's only going to be one real root or one real answer. So when we plug that into the quadratic formula, x equals negative b plus or minus the square root. Here's our b squared minus 4ac. All over 2 times a, and then we just simplify here. The square root of 0 is 0. So we do negative 6 plus or minus 0, which is just going to be negative 6, whether we add or subtract 0, divided by 2. Negative 6 divided by 2 is negative 3. Therefore, the solution to this quadratic equation is negative 3, and we found that by using the quadratic formula, and this is the only answer because the discriminant of the quadratic equation is 0. So x equals negative 3. Another example where we have x squared plus 9x equals negative 20. Our first step again is to set that equation equal to 0 by adding 20 to both sides of the equation. Use the discriminant to find out how many answers are we going to get here. So our b squared minus 4 times a times c. That's 81 minus 80. The answer is 1. So the discriminant is 1. The discriminant is positive. So there are going to be two real roots or two real answers to this quadratic equation. What are those answers? We finish out with the quadratic formula to find that. Negative b plus or minus the square root. Here's our b squared minus 4ac. That's our discriminant we just found. All over 2 times a. So we do negative 9 plus and minus 1 over 2. So I'm going to do negative 1 minus 1 first, divided by 2. Negative 1 or negative 9 minus 1 is negative 10, divided by 2 is negative 5. This is one answer. That's when we subtracted the discriminant. Now we're going to add the discriminant. Negative 9 plus 1 divided by 2. Negative 9 plus 1 is negative 8. Negative 8 divided by 2 is negative 4. So therefore, the solutions to this quadratic equation is negative 5 and negative 4. Those are the values that will make this true. Those are the zeros of this quadratic equation. So we've seen one solution, we've seen two. What do you think's coming next? 2x squared minus 3x equals 4. First thing we're going to do is set this thing equal to 0, because in order to solve any quadratic equation, we have to set it equal to 0. Let's find the discriminant. B squared minus 4 times a times c. B is negative 3. times 4 times A is 2 times C is 4. That is going to be 9 minus 32, which is negative 23. In this case, the discriminant is negative, so therefore there's no real roots. There's no solution to this quadratic equation. There is no value of x that will make this equation true. Nothing. Because, and we know that, because the discriminant of this quadratic equation is a negative number, and there is no real square root of a negative number. So there's your crash course on how to solve quadratic equations, or your refresher. Email me any questions you have regarding the notes or the practice, and I will see you on Friday.